Welcome to the AI+HI project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence for AI+HI. Thanks for joining us. Each week, we sit down with visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR to provide you with deep insights, actionable strategies, and practical advice for harnessing the transformative potential of AI combined with human ingenuity. This week, we're exploring responsible AI development and its societal impact with Pham, Vice President of AI and Machine Learning at Workday, and the inaugural Executive Director of the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee. Kathy, welcome to the AI+HI project.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I've really been looking forward to this conversation. We like to start with following someone's journey. And so you've had an impactful journey across academia, government, private sector. There's Harvard, MIT Media Lab, and then your current roles at Workday and NAIAC. Could you share a little bit about your journey and then what led you to focus on responsible AI and societal impact?
Yeah, it's fun to be able to look back on our life and see the threads, right? And while we live it, we don't always necessarily see where that goes. So when I look back, I think about how I studied computer science, and my first research project was actually in um, AI and machine learning with these Brandenburg vehicles at Georgia Tech. And then I also developed the sentiment analysis engine where we took a bunch of text on the internet. This was over about 20 years ago, and analyze the sentiment on what we were seeing. And I didn't know where to place that as I was looking, into my career moving forward. And I also always had this deep passion for the intersection of where technology really solves deep problems for society and especially for the people that might not be at the forefront of what organizations or companies might think about, because I think about where my own family came from or many communities that sometimes just don't make it to the list of priority for many organizations. So these are all things swimming in early career Kathy's head. And then I graduated and I was like, I better go get a job somewhere. So I had a pretty typical, if you will, career in software engineering, product development, a little bit of data science. And then one day there was this pivotal moment where I got a call from the White House to see if I could help start something called the United States Digital Service. And I say it was a pivotal moment because I'd always thought about technology and society in some ways, and I'd worked at some of the really large tech companies. But I hadn't occurred to me that public service is the largest way to impact society, right? Whether it's people getting access to Social Security or healthcare or veterans getting access to benefits, any number of things. And that's where I started thinking about all the different kinds of ways, in addition to just the tech sector, that we can really use our tech skills. And that really has led my way then to like not just working in government, but also doing policy work, also leading the National AI Advisory Committee. I was later asked to teach a class at Harvard on product and society, and ultimately now at Workday. Right? There are lots of seeds planted throughout the last 2 decades that really led to the role I'm in now, where I'm in a tech organization. But I think equally about how do we advance technology and how we do it responsibly. For me, they're completely the same thing. We don't decouple them.
That's a great lead into what is responsible for computing. So, for people in our audience who don't know what it is, how do you define that concept in today's AI landscape? And why is it crucial for creating technology that serves society?
Yeah, the responsible computing movement's been around for quite some time, maybe over a decade. There's a lot more attention on it as technology started becoming more ubiquitous. What I mean by that is there was a period of time where organizations could operate with or without having tech at the core of the systems. Now, though, almost any sector, any organization, healthcare, finance, retail, government, it requires technology in some way. And so when I think about what responsible technology means, it's a recognition that tech is now this foundation in ways that many other kinds of systems were like the foundation of organization. Tech is now a foundation. And so it has to think about how it serves not just everyone that uses the technology, that organization, but everyone who might be impacted by a technology. So maybe a technology that's used by government um, to determine if someone gets benefits or not. And those people might not be directly using the product, but they're definitely on the other side of the impact of that, right? So the responsible technology is thinking about how the tech that we build doesn't consider all the edge cases, if you will. It thinks about how it has to serve everyone. You start from there. There are no just power users. We just think of all of our users. And then I'll wrap this part with saying that in order to do that, I think about how we have to honor the expertise across many disciplines. I studied computer science, and we were definitely in a bit of a silo, as computer science and engineering is all that you ever need. And this is a call out to all of my peers. There's no way we can build technology that really understands the depth of impact for people around the world without bringing in social science and historians and economists and scholars of race and gender and people who've studied news for decades. All these people need to be brought in to think about what is responsibility in tech and what is responsibility for different communities and cultures as well.
Today, you're at Workday, and I'm really curious about how responsible AI practices can transform the workplace and what that impact is on workplace culture.
I love this question because I've devoted the last probably not 8 years to thinking about responsible AI in practice. And so what that looks like for me is we need the folks who think about developing frameworks, and we need deep scholars who may or may not be in practice, but have that bandwidth to really reach across many lines and come up with, let's say, responsible AI framework that takes into account policy and government and practice and industry and academic research and all of that. And we have to find ways for that for practitioners not just to look at some responsible AI list and say checkbox, but also think about how every single day they can take these principles, or we can take these principles and embed them into our software engineering and product development life cycles. That could mean in every stand up, in every meeting, in every code review. And I'll give one example of what it looks like here at Workday. We have an incredible Chief Responsible AI Officer, Kelly Trindle. She leads a team of researchers, practitioners, scholars, and they come up with principles that we use across the company. And those principles are also based off of a national set of guidelines like the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies Risk Management Framework. So the government created that. We contributed to that, and then we now use that back inside our company. So I love that partnership there. Um, and and we look at how do we take those principles, have champions, just like how in the past we maybe had security champions throughout the whole company. We have responsible AI champions who work with all the product and engineering and experience teams to always be there. It's not like they wait till the end for a review. It's always on partly part of the team where if you just have a question of, hey, I'm thinking about building this new feature to look at, certain criteria for candidates. They're there to also bounce ideas on areas there might be risk, there are areas that there might be harm, et cetera. And they're just there throughout the whole process all the time, and not like at the end of the process. So I think that's one way to culturally think about how to embed responsible and trustworthy AI principles into practice in an organization.
You mentioned some of the principles and frameworks that you've been looking at. AI and AI in organizations and generative AI, it's evolving so much. How do you think about the continued evolution of frameworks and principles? What are examples of principles that, are would be solidly consistent, or things where as we begin to build and the technology is really rubbing up against people, we learn and iterate? Like, how do you think about that?
This is such a great question about how do you think about principles that are maybe more static and then principles that are constantly or need to constantly evolve based on changing technologies. And I think we need both. I think the parallel to that, I think also our regulating bodies also need both. So I'll share an example where this has come up in regulation, and I'll tie it back to Workday. In regulation, where I've seen it come up is there are certain kinds of policies that span technology. So what that means is if you're a financial institution, you cannot cause harm or deceive customers. And And regardless of the technology backbone behind that, it, that doesn't matter as much as the outcome, right? So I was at the Federal Trade Commission, and and the person Ari Meyer, who is the former chief technology there, is also now at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and those two agencies think about the end result, right, of the harm. So I think on one hand, whether it's policy or inside our own companies, what are those principles where, regardless of the underlying mechanism or technology, we live by? So those are principles around, let's say, it's trust of our technologies, it's delivering what we say we'll deliver, it's having plans for resilience and scalability, et cetera. And those are always needed for every tech. So I would put that in the bucket of either business responsibility or just general technology responsibility frameworks that all companies have to have. And some have had for years now. And then with AI specifically, it's the recognition of, what is it that's a little bit different about this right now that might be changing, where we have these addendums to our principles, right? Maybe it's about, oh, we have to care about data sets more so than we had to before because now we're training on that data set. And not just that, if you're an enterprise company like us, unlike the consumer tech, so when I say consumer tech, it's the tools you just use on the internet. We don't just train on anyone's data. These are customer data that have to be kept secure and private. And we have to think about how do we now train our models while also preserving privacy and security. So these are new principles that then develop around what's new about AI specifically, that have to come up and maybe be edited or changed along the way. But then they also come back to the core principles of having trust in your system, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's like a multi-tier level of practices that have to exist.
Thank you. We're really interested in how AI can augment human capabilities. Can you share an example from how you think about responsible AI and augmentation, and maybe an example where AI really enhances decision making without replacing it?
Yes. I'll share two examples of where AI enhances decision making, and one will be focused on the use of the technology itself, and then one will be focused on how the technology can surface maybe people or skills that we've never thought of before. So on the side of using the technology itself, one thing we've seen it do the past maybe now 2 years is offer up skills and offer up abilities that perhaps are inaccessible before. So maybe it's writing a memo to the chief executive officer or the head of state, and you've just never were able to go to a university where the practice of writing memos is pretty common, like here at Harvard. But now you're able to come up with a memo, or you're able to come up with a legal document that at least is almost there and can bring to someone for review, right? There are all these things that we've put behind walls, behind like walls of privilege, if you will, sometimes, where unless you were able to get past that, you just couldn't gain these abilities and skills. And these are people who are incredibly capable and competent. And now with these skills, the playing field is a little bit more leveled. So I think that's one area I think about a lot, where how do we amplify people's abilities by offering up capabilities and skills that you otherwise were not able to attain for reasons outside of your own abilities.
Mhm.
The other part is when we're thinking about candidates, for example, or people we want to hire, how can we use technology to bring in people people from around the country, around the world, who we might have not considered before? So I find the world of skills-based hiring really, really interesting. My dad was a truck driver.
My dad was a plumber.
Oh, yeah, like lots of like the critical people who do the work, right? And folks who might not understand that field might not also know that when you're a truck driver, you're also like the logistics that you have to think about, the detail orientation that you need, like the courage that you need, like the resilience, like all of this can also really be applied to roles inside, let's say, a cushy tech job that I'm able to have now, and doors that it can really open. I think to allow for mobility in roles is really, really powerful. So I think about that. That's another way, like amplifying people by offering up weight, by allowing organizations to find people they otherwise might not find to fill roles that they can do. And he might, my dad is now passed, but he might have wanted to be, or he did want to be a truck driver forever. But should he choose to want to go into a Workday one day, how do we highlight those skills that would make him an incredible Workday employee that otherwise in our normal job descriptions might have missed?
One of the things that I think about a lot is cultural change. And, how does one create a culture that values responsible AI? What are some of the challenges and pushbacks that people are experiencing when they, they come in and they say, okay, we need to do this responsibly? Could you speak to the culture around creating an organization that fosters and prioritizes responsible AI and responsible innovation and collaboration?
Yeah. I think the culture around responsible AI is requires pretty much all hands on deck at all levels. It requires a top-down leadership saying, "Hey, we care about responsible AI, not just for optics reasons. We care about it deeply in the core of our company." And then the next step is to help the company understand what that is. Because when you say, "Oh, we care about being responsible and trustworthy," everyone's like, "Yeah, of course we do. We all care about this." But the moment you start defining what that looks like for a product team or a marketing team or engineering team, that's where what it looks like in practice starts to either deviate or be misaligned, or just have different definitions. And so I think alignment from the at the very least, top down, this is something that we care about. And then the practices that then now it's like meeting all of our teams where they are, helping the marketing and the engineering and the product teams understand what does responsible AI look like in my discipline and vertical, so that then we can actually implement it and do something about it. And then the incentives. So we can say we care about this, but when you are telling teams they have to ship and meet certain goals, and those goals might sometimes counter these principles and practices you also tell them to care about. At the end of the day, people have jobs because some people have, or many people have jobs because it's a job for our living, right? And so if you have to prioritize, you prioritize the one that means you'll do your job well, so you can keep your job. And so ultimately, it's the incentives too that then align with, okay, if every time you align with the responsible AI, responsible tech principles, every time you raise a concern that we might have seen before, you get rewarded, or at the very least, you don't get dinged or something. So I think it's top down, having principles, fitting those into each vertical that people are in, and also rewarding and having incentives for acting in the right way.
Yeah, those are three great lessons learned. Everything rolls from the top in terms of what people believe in and how they think uh, the organization's culture is evolving, making sure that within their specific role, they know what responsible means, because that's where that could be defined a half dozen different ways. But what does it mean for me in marketing, or what does it mean for me in sales or product or whatever? And then really making sure that the incentives are aligned, because incentives are everything. And sometimes they're explicit and often they're implicit. And so it sounds like you're also saying, like, align the incentives, make them explicit so people understand what being responsible actually means. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll share one anecdote from a prior organization. This wasn't specific to AI, but there was a teammate who had caused a big bug and basically caused the system to go down, and immediately notified because they felt safe to notify the organization and put in a ticket and raise their hand and said, I brought this down. I discovered a problem. It's my fault. I did it. And then everyone scurried to fix it, and that person got a reward for bringing it down, but also for very quickly raising their hand. And I think about that a lot in terms of incentives for as we build responsible AI, especially now when there's so much attention on let's use AI somewhere, especially for organizations. Everyone wants to figure out where to insert AI and let's move fast and figure it out. How do we also make sure that if people take a pause or or actually they're moving fast, but they want to pivot directions, they get rewarded for this when they raise a concern.
I was able to interview Mary Murphy, who wrote Growth Cultures on top of Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. And, you know, what I think is happening is that the cultures of innovation are also AI compatible cultures. And those AI compatible cultures are cultures where people are allowed to make mistakes and where everyone's learning and growing together. And so you know, everyone's figuring this out in terms of what it looks like really actually deployed. Because to your point, you started working on AI like 20 years ago, really the beginnings of it. And so now we're at a place where it's really coming into organizations and it's really touching actual human beings. And what are the incentives? What is the culture? What are the executives saying? What are team members saying? What are managers saying that make people implement it in a responsible way, which I also think is going to be the successful way as well. It's still too early to tell. We are in the very first inning of this part of the game, but I think I think it's interesting.
I love what you said, Nicole, about the responsible way is also the successful way. Because I'll hear tropes like, "Oh, what do you think about um, the pull between innovation and responsibility, and how do they coexist?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? Of course they can coexist." And we have examples of when you're responsible, when you prioritize secure private systems. If you're enterprise, you get more customers and they stay with you. If you're a consumer and people have more of a choice to leave, they stay. And for me, it's definitely of course, if you're responsible, you're also a better organization.
And also the other thing is that employees are always watching what leadership and what managers do. And so, a big part of organizational transformation is the employees contributing to the shift of the business architecture, where they're the ones who are saying, oh, we can do this better, this differently, this could be automated, this could be this could be augmented, and this can be enhanced. And the people who really know it best are the people who just did the work. So, like, the C-suite might have a big picture view of what's going on, but it's been so long since they did those jobs, they don't actually know, the intricacy of those jobs, but the people doing it know the intricacy of it. And so, I think, when people look and see how people are treated, when they look and see what the philosophy is around some basic human principles, that also I think are in the static bucket of responsible AI, then that has a big impact on how willing they are to help you change the business architecture and automate big chunks of their job. Because if they've seen you be responsible, in all of these other ways, then they'll say, well, you know, I know that my role is going to change. I know that life is going to change, but I believe I'll be treated fairly. I might not keep my job, but I'll be treated fairly. And so I think the organizations that are able to capture their, employee contribution and all of that creativity by also showing up as responsible, I think they're the ones that are going to outperform and be market leaders.
I love that point. Yeah, I love that point about bringing the employees and individual contributors along, to really understand what's going on, to build for just a better company and a better organization. And even in addition to the employees, I work with organizations that also have a lot of contingent workers, whether it's healthcare, retail, etc. I really understand from their perspective as well. And I also think that right now, this moment with AI, there are many things that are unique about this moment. One of them is that there was a technology that first hit the consumer base. So with ChatGPT and GPT, the technology for GPT was around for a while. ChatGPT, as many know, made it something that many people now understand. And then businesses later then said, oh, we have to do this too. There's so much that many of our colleagues across the company really understand, and that in ways that in the past, maybe the business technology was over here or maybe on the forefront and the employees might not really understand them. Now in many ways, our employees understand maybe even more than some of our executives on what this technology is and what it can do. So to your point, to not listen to that group or to not bring our colleagues along would be a huge a loss for where we can go.
Yeah. So, one of the questions that we like to ask everyone is really about measurement.
Mhm.
So, how do we measure and know the impact of being responsible AI? Like, how do we measure that?
I think it's different for different kinds of organizations. So I'll speak to the enterprise business to business, but I also have thoughts on the consumer side. I think a high level vanity metric, if you will, is um, who chooses to stay with your organization, right? So if you're not responsible, so I actually think all AI needs to be responsible AI, but if you're not responsible, you'll just lose customers over time, right? Because a healthcare organization, a government, a retailer, like they're relying on us for technology. And if we're not responsible, we don't treat the data with care. We have issues or anything like that that might happen, which hasn't happened for us. You just will lose customers. I think that's like one metric, and I say it's a vanity metric because it's a pretty high level, right? There are many reasons why organization may or may not stay with a vendor. I think other metrics that are perhaps more qualitative metrics that we also need to measure is to dive down and see how well are employees doing with the technology. What are people's productivity across different types of jobs in the company, so especially like across different kinds of pay structures as well. Is it impacting some people more than others? Who are the types of people we're bringing into our organization if we're using different kinds of AI technologies? So I think there are a lot of more qualitative metrics to really measure, in addition to perhaps the quantitative metrics that are number of users, number of customers, et cetera.
Okay, so final question. I'm an HR leader. I
Mhm.
am a part of our AI implementation because one of the things we're seeing, by the way, in our research with SHRM is that HR is in the room. 1 out of 5 times they're in a leadership position, 1 out of 4 times they're decision maker. And, as it relates to compliance and some other things, they are in the room. So I'm an HR leader. I'm in the room. I've listened to this podcast. I believe in responsible AI. What do I do tomorrow when I go back to the office? What's your
Yeah.
advice?
Well, we're absolutely seeing HR leaders in the room, and not just that, leaders of different like groups inside the organization, right? Or in addition to, I think historically maybe just the CIO. Um, I would one have a set of questions to ask all my vendors that have any kind of AI component, to ask them how they manage the data, how they train, what offerings they have. So I think there is the bucket of make sure your or AI house is in order for your vendors. But the other part is, oh, what opportunities do you have for me to implement in my organization to hire better, to find candidates I've never even thought of before that might be from various marginalized communities globally, to help me do better performance review, to help me better succession plan, like any number of like talk to our vendors about offerings they have while also asking them about their infrastructure, the way they train, like ask them for their own responsible AI practices, their framework, ask them for details on how they train any of their systems and what data sets they might have. And I think the other part out and I think what I'm seeing that's really heartening is the community that especially HR leaders are creating with each other. So if you haven't already, some of you probably have, reach out to peers who are thinking about how to bring AI to organizations and develop a little community of practice, because those are incredibly powerful as well to ask, well, how are you thinking about responsibility and AI for HR? Because I think of all the sectors and all the fields, HR and AI has the most critical and fascinating questions to answer when it comes to responsibility, because it's people's lives, people's livelihood, and so I'll like create a community of practice as well and discuss those critical topics.
And that's it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Kathy for sharing your insights and experiences with us. To our listeners, if you enjoyed today's discussion, please follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy podcasts, and consider leaving a review to help spread the word. It makes a big difference. And you can also find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.